Great. So today we're looking at understanding defense, how you can secure your network and your resources in there. So we're going to look at what defense in depth is. We're also going to look at some of the security policies, regulations, and standards that you need to have in place in order to secure your network. So there's this concept called defense in depth, and before we even explain what it is, you need to understand what you're trying to defend when you're securing your network. So one of the most important things you might want to defend is the assets. So you have so assets are just anything of value to the organization that must be protected, and that might include servers, infrastructure devices, end devices, and so on and so forth. And then another thing that you need to pay attention to is the vulnerabilities that exist. What are the weaknesses that exist, especially when you look at your assets? Yeah, so you need to do some sort of audit on your assets to identify the existing vulnerabilities within. And then another thing is the threat, any potential danger to an asset. Yeah, so it can be a person, it can be a natural occurrence, a natural disaster that can pose threat, can be a threat to your assets. Can be so many things. Yeah, so you need to have an idea of the kind of threats that you might face. So under assets, you need to have to have a collection of all the devices and information owned or managed by the organization. So assets. So you need to have an inventory of all the assets that you have in the organization, and some of those assets also carry information with them. So that you can now go ahead and perform an audit on those assets. Yeah. So this task can be quite entailing, considering that many organizations must protect internal users, resources, mobile workers, and cloud-based and virtual-based services. So you can see that you might end up having so many resources, an inventory of so many resources at the end of the day. So what you need to do as an organization is to sit down, have a look at all those assets, and then because you can't protect all the assets because there are so many, then you need to categorize the assets that are of the most important assets, right? Those ones that will need more protection, those ones are the ones that you might channel resources towards in terms of protecting. And then we have those resources that might pose less risk. They have risks attached to them, but in terms of security, they won't be that harmful in terms of revenue, in terms of the operation of the organization, in case those assets they are attacked, right? So this is an important thing to just be able to how to categorize the assets accordingly. Yeah. And then information assets vary, as do the threat against them. So each of these assets can attack different threat actors who have different skill levels and motivation. Yeah, so we said that what you want to do is ask yourself a number of questions when you are trying to identify vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the system after you've categorized the assets. So one of the questions you'd want to ask yourself is, what are the possible vulnerabilities of a system? Yeah. Number two, you want to also know who the threat actor might be. Yeah, the threat to the assets, who might want to exploit the vulnerabilities. And number three, you want to also do an impact analysis, business impact analysis. So you want to know the impact of the threat, the cost of the attack onto the assets. So yeah. So under asset identification, you collect all the devices and information owned or managed by the organization on those assets, and of course you ensure that the assets are I think I was going back. So the threat identification of, so we have an example here. For example, we have an e-commerce, not e-commerce, a banking system. So we want to do the threat identification for an e-banking system, and so we'll break it down into bits. So we first of all will look at the internal system compromise. So we know that the attacker uses the exposed e-banking servers to break into internal bank system. So we look at the internal system compromise and then stolen customer data. We know that the attacker steals the personal and financial data of the bank customers from the customer database. So that customer database will be one asset. So one of the assets would be the server that is exposed to the public. Another asset would be the database, customer database, that the attacker might want to steal customer data from. And we also know that another category will be so an attacker alters the code of the e-banking application and makes transactions. So we have the application itself, yeah. So that might be another avenue or another vector for the attacker. And then we also have so an attacker can steal the identity of the customer and complete malicious transaction from the compromised account. So phony transaction using stolen customer PIN or smart card. That so the card might be another asset, right? And then of course errors. So a user inputs incorrect data or makes incorrect transaction requests. So we want to ensure that we have input validation. So another avenue that the attacker can use is, of course, the forms that the user enters their data. Another thing can be data center destruction, and the threat here might be a natural one. A natural event can occur that severely damages and destroys the data center. So that can be another area of concern. So all these are vulnerabilities that can coexist within the system, and they range from those ones that can be used by a person, by weak. So some vulnerabilities can be exploited by natural events, can be exploited by a threat actor, and others might just be exploited by something else. So there are different threats in short. So identifying vulnerabilities on a network requires an understanding of the important applications used, as well as the different vulnerabilities that the application and that exist on the application and the hardware. So this approach uses multiple layers of security at the network edge, and so you can have like a router first to screen the traffic before it forwards it into a dedicated firewall, and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking at some of the layers that exist that a user has to go, or a request that wants to get into a request into the network resources has to go through. So some of the rings around a network in the defense in-depth, we have the edge router that at the very edge of the network So this is the first line of defense. It's known as edge router. That's router 1. And then so it also has some rules that that have to be fulfilled before it allows traffic in or out, right? So and then from there it will let the traffic get to the firewall, and the firewall is like the second line of defense. And of course a firewall has it has predefined rules or policies that also look at the traffic and see if it meets the threshold. If it doesn't meet the threshold, then it will block the traffic. If it meets the threshold as per the policies that have been defined, then it will let the traffic in. And then we also have internal router, so which is another line of defense in the internal route in the network, and that also can apply extra filtering, so it has extra rules. And remember, we can also have besides these three, we can also have an intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system just aligned before the firewall, yeah, to also check the traffic. So the idea of security in depth can be well understood by just having a look at what we call the security onion, because at the center you see we have at the center here we have the assets, and then before you get access to the assets you have to peel off a number of layers, or you have to go through a number of layers. So on the very outside we have the firewall, so the traffic that gets in has to go through the firewall, has to pass all the firewall rules, and then once it gets past the firewall, in fact you can have like two firewalls, yeah. Sometimes you have the external facing firewall and then you also have another firewall inside, yeah. But anyway, you have the firewall and then you have the intrusion prevention system or intrusion detection system. So you can have both IDS and IPS at this layer. And then next you have content filtering. Just look at the content and ensure that it is what is expected. And thirdly, you have another layer that asks you that is there to authorize. You can see authentication, authorization, and accounting. So you can't really get access to the resources until you've been authorized. And then of course you have another layer that entails the hardened devices, yeah. So that's this clearly explain what defense in depth is. And you can add more layers to this. You don't have to like only go with the layers that exist right there. So the security one described on this page is a way of visualizing defense in depth, and it's quite clear. So that used to work back in the days where you have a network with the parameters of defense layer, yeah. That used to work back then, but nowadays you get that it becomes so difficult to secure a network because these parameters no longer coexist because of the nature of the kind of setup we have. And so we have what we call a borderless network at in most places, yeah. So what we refer to as security artichoke, yeah. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this one benefits the threat actors quite a lot because we don't have these layers that will delay the threat actors to get to the asset, yeah. So they can just easily peel one layer and they'll be able to easily get to whatever resource they want, yeah. So they only need to remove an artichoke leaf and they access whatever they want to access. So so for example here we have a buffer overflow vulnerability, yeah. So once the attacker just gets in through that, it's able to access the resources and then you can see we have a database right here. We have a client attack, client side attack, and so on and so forth. We have password existing somewhere there. So everything is distributed and not really existing within some sort of wall. So let's look at some of the security policies and regulations that can help us even ensure that we enforce some of those concepts we've talked about, especially security in depth. So when talking of policies, we have what we call business policies, and these are just guidelines, and they're developed by an organization to govern its actions. Yeah. So these policies define standards of correct behaviors for businesses and its employees. In networking, policies define the activities that are allowed on the network. This sets up a baseline of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of behavior. And an organization may have several guiding policies. So some of the policies, as you can see, we have company policies, and what company policies will do is they'll establish the rules of conduct and also the responsibilities by employees and employers, and also protect the rights of workers as well as the business interest of employers. Depending on the needs of the organization, various policies and procedures establish rules regarding employee contact, attendance, dress code, and so on and so forth. And then we have employee policies. So these policies are created and maintained by human resource staff, just to identify employee salary, pay schedule, and employee benefits, work schedule, vacation, and so on and so forth. So they'll often provide new employees to review and sign. So as a new employee, you have to go through that and sign, so that in case you violate any of that in future, you don't have to, and you're sued, you will not have to complain to anyone. Yeah, you have to read that. And then we have security policies, and this will identify a set of security objectives for a company, will define the rules of behaviors for users and administrators, and will also specify system requirements. So they'll collectively ensure that the security of a network and the computer systems, they'll ensure for the security of networks and computer system in an organization, and also so these security policies don't remain constant. They are always evolving. Yeah, so they'll in most cases so we'll keep changing them based on the threat landscape and the vulnerabilities and businesses and employment requirements, because these things keep changing. The threat landscape will always keep changing, and that's why you always have to be updated on what is new. So security policies are used to inform users, staff, and managers of an organization for protecting technology and information assets. So what would a comprehensive security policy have? So they'll have a number of things. So a comprehensive security policy will demonstrate an organization's commitment to security, set the rules for expected behavior, ensure consistency in system operations, software and hardware acquisition and use and maintenance, and they'll also define the legal consequences of the violation of those policies, and then also give security staff the backing of the management. So when you go to do security audit, you want to see if an organization has policies in place, security policies in place. If they lack, then that's a minus on their side. If they have, then that's a good thing. But then you also want to go ahead and then look at the kind of security policies that are in place and whether they're enforced or not enforced. If they are quality policies as per that point in time or not. Yeah. So there's just an audit, a security audit on policy. So a security policy also specifies the mechanisms that are needed to meet security requirements and provide a baseline for which to acquire, configure, and audit computer systems. And then so here we have examples of policies that may be included in the security policy, because that is of concern to us. And number one, you can see we have identification and authentication policy. So this one just specifies authorized persons that can have access to network resources, and also identify verification procedures. What procedures do the users have to go through to be authenticated and maybe authorized to access resources? And then we have password policies. Just these ones ensure that passwords meet minimum requirements and are changed regularly. Yeah. So a policy might be like passwords have to expire after like 30 days, and users have to set new passwords. And then can also define the password strength, the number of characters that a password should have, and the type of characters that the password should entail. So that all that falls under the password policy. And then we have acceptable use policy. So under the acceptable use policy, this one just identifies network applications and users that are acceptable. So what activities are we going to allow in the network? Which ones are we not going to allow in the network? And so on and so forth. For example, we might not allow users who are using our network to access social sites, like Facebook and so on and so forth, or other sites. Or we might not allow users to use this type of gadgets in our network, but we'll only allow them to use the gadgets that we've given them, and so on and so forth. So that's acceptable use policy. And then you have remote access policy, and so on just identifies how remote users can access a network and what is accessible via remote connectivity. So you might also define here that if you have to use the remote network, you need to maybe use a VPN. Maybe the organization has its VPN, and also define the resources that can only be accessed remotely. Network maintenance policy, it specifies network devices or operating systems and end user applications update procedures. And then we also have incident handling procedures. In case an incident occurs, how is that incident going to be handled, who is going to be in charge, and so on and so forth. So all that is under incident handling and response, of course. We can't finish this discussion without going through what we call bring your own device policies, because nowadays most organizations would advise or encourage people to, or employees and employers to, carry their own devices to work. It introduces some sort of flexibility, because even after you leave work, you can proceed working from home, and it's also financially it has some financial benefits to the organization, in the sense that the organization will not have to spend quite a lot in terms of acquiring the hardware for the users. So plus so many other benefits, of course. So bring your own device enables employees to use their own mobile devices to access company systems, software, networks, and so on and so forth. So some of the benefits include increased productivity, reduced cost, better mobility for employees, and so on. So this will bring about increased security risk, as bring your own devices can lead to data breaches and greater liability for the organization, because you can't manage it becomes very difficult to manage those devices, because they are scattered all over, and then those people, the employees who use those devices, away from work, you can tell how they will use the devices. They might use the devices to access some dangerous sites and whatnot. They might be exposed to dangerous people at the end of the day, malicious people who can easily access and install malware, and so on and so forth. So BYD security policy should be developed to accomplish the following. So number one, should be able to specify the goal of the BYD program. and also identify which employees can bring their own devices, maybe not everyone, and then identify which devices will be supported in the network and which ones will not be supported. Identify the level of access employees are granted when using personal device. Also describe the rights of access and activities permitted to security personnel. Identify which regulations must be adhered to when using employee devices, and lastly identify safeguards to put in place if a device is compromised. So what are some of the best security practices for BYODs to mitigate the BYOD vulnerabilities? So one, password protect access. So always use unique password for each device. Don't have a similar password being used by everyone. Manually control wireless connectivity. So we have to turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity when not in use. Only turn it on when in use. And we encourage the users to only connect to trusted networks, not to connect to any other network. And then keep the device updated always, to ensure that in case we had any vulnerabilities, all those get patched. Back up the data continuously, so that in case of any compromise, we don't have data stolen and lost. And then enable find my device, that will make it easy to identify the device once it is lost. Provide antivirus software to just secure the device and the applications and the data. And then use mobile device management, MDM software, which enables IT teams to implement security settings and software configurations on the devices that connect to the company. So and then we have regulatory standards and compliance. So part of the security audit, if you have to carry one, or if you are trying to enforce some of the security measures in your organization, you have to work in line with the existing regulatory standards, an element of the law of the land. So we have these regulations plus so the laws of the land and the international regulations. So we have so many of these regulations. Besides the law, of course, we have like ISO, I think it is 27001. We have COBIT. We have GDPR. We have HIPAA. We have there are quite a lot. I can go on mentioning more and more, and they handle different things. So for example, for data protection, you might want to comply to GDPR if you're handling if the organization is a healthcare facility and you're handling data that has healthcare data, you have to comply with HIPAA. If you are doing credit card kind of transactions, so you have to comply to, for example, PCI DSS and so on and so forth. So those are some of the regulations, maybe not mentioned here, but you just need to know. So there are quite a lot, but ensure you comply to those ones that relate to your organization and what your organization is trying to do. So network security professionals must be familiar with the laws and codes of ethics that are binding on information security, system security, and so they also organizations are mandated to develop and implement security policies based on those. And then compliance to regulations. So organizations are responsible for providing they are responsible for complying to these regulations, and if they fail to, of course, they have to pay penalties, because these regulations come with failure to comply to some of these regulations come with heavy penalties. So that marks the end of this